Welcome to Gaulcast, and we have a very special episode that very much came off the fly, but I am glad that we decided to do it. We are going to be talking about our favorite bear mother. I am Articanos, and with me is my co-host.
Rena Tarvos. And like the lie told to you throughout all of your childhood, if you went to public school, we have emerged after half of a year of slumber to greet the world once again. Yeah, today we're going to be talking about the bear mother, Arito. Um, both of us actually, I think, have independently, but have really grown fond of the bear mother. Um, she's a very unique deity, as far as we can tell, within the Gaulish sphere of influence. You know, the pantheon, for lack of a better word. And
Yeah.
recently, we've been noticing some trends that she seems to be gaining wider popularity within online polytheism. I've seen a couple TikToks towards her. I have seen a few books being published. I have seen some articles, some statues being made on Etsy and so forth, and it warms the heart. It's great to see. Yeah, so we're each going to be talking about our own experiences with Arito. I'm going to share some folklore from Switzerland that has very strong Arito vibes. We're going to be talking about comparative mythology and also some of the other traditions that we know of and their relationship to figures like Arito to help people uh, establish, their own praxis and incorporate what they like, and even just to gush a little bit about her. She is magical.
Yeah,
Yeah. All
absolutely.
right. So yeah, take us away.
Yeah.
Why don't you start us off?
So, like you had covered, we've been seeing a lot more of you say Arito, I like to say Artio. Essentially, we're talking about the same deity. Um, we've been seeing her a lot more in pop culture, and she seems to be on the same track as Cernunnos is in popping up in things like Wicca and other practices and spiritualities. I think what made me decide to bring this up to do an episode is the band Wardruna is using imagery in on T-shirts and whatnot. And actually, a few years back, there's a popular video game called Smite where she is a playable character. That's actually where I first learned about her before I started looking it up. Um, but yes, RTO is a fascinating bear deity that comes from Switzerland primarily, with the very famous Muri statuette group. These are bronze statues that were found in Muri, Switzerland, I believe, if I'm saying any of that
Yep.
correctly. But
You
this
were
is
you
a
were correct. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, they're
Um,
found in a Gallo-Roman temple, right?
yes, yes. So it's more of so this is less of the kind of Latin art style. This is more of a Roman influenced art style, which has got definitely a lot less anthropomorphism and more literal humanoid depictions. But the one of Artio, it shows a woman sitting upon a throne. I'm looking at the image right now, with a bear in front of what looks like an apple tree, kind of not exactly squaring up as like a threat, but just kind of like just proudly standing before this seated woman. That these are two possibly the way I kind of look at it, these are two aspects of the same deity.
Well, I got a fun factoid about this statue.
Oh, good,
We
good, good.
can tell that the bear has been moved from the position based on cutting and basically re-smelting of the base of the statue, and we also see that the alloy that the seated woman is made out of is different, um, and she has been attached there in the spot where they now assume previously the bear had been. So what the
Oh.
current interpretation is that Arito, what might have very well have been worshipped in her bear form, being depicted entirely as a bear, but through the influx of Roman culture, and we all know from Roman tirades against Egyptians how much the Roman people considered worshiping things that weren't human in appearance, how much beneath them they considered that. So
Oh yeah.
the current theory that people are working with is that the bear was cut off and pushed to the side underneath the tree and then turned to face in one direction. And a very generic Magna Mater type, like a Sybil or uh, one of those other a Gaia type was then attached to present the image that while she may have been depicted as a bear in the past, this is how we see her now. And it's fun because
Mm.
this is the only um, depiction we have of Arito is this. Um, and so one can only speculate, but the fact that it was deliberately altered um, shows us that there was something going on, and that's where the current leading theory comes from, especially because her name Arito derives from Arctos, right? Which is the Gaulish
Yep.
word for bear, and that's actually part of your namesake.
It is. I chose the name Artokatos as a way to honor Artio because she was a deity who presented herself in my life, not just in a video game, but like when I finally started getting into polytheism and paganism, she was definitely a just profoundly ever present deity from the get go. And I actually on the wall here, bears are very much. I feel that bears have kind of always kind of been on the maternal side of my family. There's a picture on the wall next to me of a black bear at my great grandparents' property. Didn't do anything. It was just walking along, and they took a little snapshots of it. And of course, or not of course, because I have never talked about it before. But my great grandfather hunted a grizzly bear and had its paw stuffed and has I think my aunt has it now. But so bears in my family have a pretty like tied history. So when I chose the name Artocatus, I wanted to honor Artio and Katos coming from the Gaulish word for battle because I'm a veteran. That's where the Artocatus comes from. But yes, Artio's name derives from the direct word for bear, Artos. So
Hmm.
yes.
Yeah. So again, her name is not something like Cernunnos, which is the horned one. It is quite literally just bear. So
Yes.
I think that does lend credence to the idea that she was originally depicted as a bear. And it's very fun because there are many places in Switzerland and southern Germany to this day that use bears in their heraldry. Even the Moody statue group it was not too far from Bern, um, which features a giant bear um, on its crest. And what's even more astounding is that depending on where you fall on this, the very first evidence of any sort of religious activity in that area may be tied to bears. Switzerland is home to what might, and I specify might, be one of the oldest sites of human religious activity. Um, there are several caves in the Alps that are home to bear cave paintings and bear effigies, but specifically the oldest one is the one I'm talking about, and I'm gonna look up the name for it right now. But this cave is actually filled with cave bear skulls, and when I talk about cave bears, I'm talking about the short snouted cave bears. This is something that was even far, far bigger than any grizzly we have today. Um, and they were huge, and they competed with humans for space, and they competed for resources. Um, but this one actually, this site may have been established by Neanderthals. So you have some speculative theories, mostly the fact that some of these caves are filled with what seem to be just the skulls and the thigh bones of cave bears, and specifically the fact that the thigh bone is driven through the eye socket in a couple of the examples, a way that would be very hard to just spontaneously occur. And so some early people from the theosophy movements, like Rudolf Steiner, they were very much of the opinion that this was the oldest possible, or at least visible, sort of evidence of human religiosity, and that the site had been established by Neanderthals in the area. Um, how true exactly that is, I can't say. I know that his theory is not 100% accepted. There's a lot of contention, and people saying, again, you have a pile of bones. That's not evidence towards anything. It's not a slam dunk. It's a neat theory that is very
Yeah.
cool. I love the idea of it, but I can't wholeheartedly say that, I'd bet a large amount of money on it. A small amount, probably, but a large
But
amount, I don't know.
it is neat to think about, and yeah, this will probably be contested for quite some time until something gets discovered to kind of give us a more hard stance on it. But when you say it's a snort, short
I did it too.
snout, yeah. Uh, anyway, a short snout bear. I'm looking at the Murray photo again, and it makes me think that the bear statuette might have been based on that because the snout on that is fairly short for what one would see on like a brown or black bear.
Yeah, I mean, it
So
could be that there's elements that remained in folklore. We know that some First Nations people in Canada have folklore and spirits that seem to be reminiscent of mammoths. We know that
mhm,
the Siberian tribes in Taimyr to this day have a very deep spiritual relationship with mammoths, and they use a lot of mammoths' bones, and they work with mammoth spirits, despite the fact that they went extinct a long time ago too. So it could very well be. I don't know for
yeah,
sure, but it could very well be. It's all
yep,
fun to think about.
exactly. It's all speculation. It's fun. It is fun to think about. And actually that's something we should bring up real quick is the fact that of other places that have um, kind of bear centric worship. I know that there is a one that comes to mind. I think I talked about it in the article on Archeo that I wrote. Let me see if I can look it up real quick. But there, the island of Japan, the 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 northernmost island. The people there, I believe, were bear
Yeah,
worshippers.
The Ainu people.
Thank you, thank you.
Yep. Yeah, no, and they have a very strong bear ceremony, and that, yeah, ties into a lot of Central Asian systems. From who the Ainu are distantly related to. Um, but that really goes all the way up into even Uralic people. You have the Finnish people who even to
Mm,
this day have very strong relationships with the bear. A bear is called grandfather or grandmother of the forest, and there are some Finnish hunting customs that are very elaborate that are documented in Norse sources, where if a bear was killed, then its tail would be cut off, and it would be attached with a golden ring to a whole garland of stuff in order to convince the bear to leave the place. You had to perform a ceremony. You had to attach the bear's head to a stick so that the spirit of the bear could float back up. Which one of my one of my teachers is a Siberian shaman, and his people have a very strong connection with the bear. And
Mm,
I can't talk about too much of stuff. Maybe we can get him on the show, and he'll be happy to talk about it. Um,
that would be
I
fantastic.
don't
Yeah.
have the authority to, but there are very similar ceremonies that deal with the proper return of the bear spirit. And a big trend in a lot of these, we see this, like you said, with the Ainu ceremony, where the bear comes to live with the people. The Ainu have a very strong bear ceremony where the bear cub is captured and is then taken into the village and is treated like royalty and is raised for a certain amount of years on, first human milk and then food, and it's given a wonderful life, in terms of being able to eat as much as it wants and not have to struggle or worry. And then it is offered in a ritual, and the spirit is properly ushered out and sent home. And there's very strict rules, like you can only
Mm,
perform the ceremony so many times in such amount of time. And there's very strict taboos that come with that. We see that also in the Siberian and Mongolian shamanisms, where the bear spirit is not something to be trifled with. It is uh, something that is almost a sort of mirror raised to humanity, whereas we as people um, are mostly physical, but have a very, very strong spiritual side. um, we see almost the same thing, the exact opposite side of the coin. If we're going on like a sliding scale, we're right off to the right side of center, and they're right off to the left side of center. A bear has a lot of things in common. A bear is an omnivore with
mm,
humans. They produce relatively small amounts of children. They're heavily invested in the rearing of their children's. They're very emotionally involved. They're mammals. They can also briefly stand on two legs. Their paw prints look very similar to our hands, and these are patterns that are recognized by cultures all over the world, but specifically that Central Asian all the way to the Uralic and down to Japan, where the bear is incredibly honored. It is almost seen as a sort of cousin to humanity. And in some Siberian origin tales, it's actually said that humanity comes from bears. Bears are the original mother. The mother of humanity is who birthed us, and then that's a bear, a great bear from the sky. The Big Dipper is oftentimes seen as a bear. And if you know anything about a lot of Asian spiritual systems, is that the Big Dipper, is seen as a very auspicious symbol. That very same symbol that has kind of been ruined by a certain grumpy man at the turn of the 19th century, which I won't mention. Um, yeah, that abhorrent, disgusting creature. Um, but he ruined a symbol that was very much tied uh, to the bear constellation and good fortune, and yeah, a lot of different meanings in a lot of different spiritual systems. There's even folklore from well, I won't say folklore. It's stories. It's history. Um, of the Ute people, which are the people indigenous to Colorado. And while Colorado had many and has many native people that call this place home, a lot of them were migrating uh, tribes on the Great Plains, and a lot of them ended up settling in the mountains later. But the Ute people have always been here, as far as we know, as far as they know. Um, and as far as it probably was, they've always been here. And their origin story goes very similar. Again, we have a bear to thank, though not from the mother side, but from the human side. It goes that their creator, Sunawik, um, which I might have butchered, and I really, really apologize for that. If there are any Ute listeners, I sincerely apologize for the butchering of that. But Sunawik, the creator, um, lived in the world above, and there was a hole from the celestial realm down. And he decided one day to create. So he started putting a lot of things into the hole, and he started sticking his arm down and pushing down with his feet, and eventually journeying down, and he would start to make and shape the world, and the world was beautiful. And his daughter wanted to venture down into the world, and she wanted to explore and play, and he said, no, that is not the world for you. You are a celestial being. You are up here with me. You shouldn't go down there. There's nothing for you. Um, but like anyone who has daughters or sons or any sort of children, nieces, nephews, grandchildren, dogs, even cats, especially anyone who has a small creature that you're trying to teach to behave generally doesn't work. She saw the beauty and the mystery and all of the wonderful things to explore in her father's creation. So, she came down and she'd play in the river, and she would run across the streams, and she would frolic in the mountains. And right here, actually, about a 2-hour drive from me, Pikes Peak. I've been there before. I've offered, according to Buddhist custom, I have offered to her. But yeah, that grew to be her favorite spot, right by Pikes Peak. And one day she met a handsome man while she was down there. He was young and he was strapping and he had long hair, beautiful skin, probably rippling muscles, or maybe he was less muscular. Maybe he was more of a skinny lad or a husky type. But whatever she liked, that's what he was. He was ideal. And what grew playful at first, he would show her where the best fishing spots were, where to eat berries. He would teach her about the wind and the sunshine. Gradually grew into feelings of affection and admiration, and they would spend days together, held close. They would spend time talking to each other and telling stories and gazing into each other's eyes. And during all this time, she would still creep to the heavenly realm, kind of go in, go out, check in, make sure dad's not there, do the old Ferris Bueller, take a few stars and clouds and whatever, make like a fake pillow. I'm kidding, that's not in it. But, that's what I would imagine she would do. And it's not made clear if Sunoic knew what she was doing, but his following actions lead me to believe that he probably had an idea. Because she came down again, and then eventually, one thing led to another, and the two embraced, and they made love, and it was moving, and she fell asleep, and then she awoke to her father, who had come down and was there with her. And she tried to explain. She said, "Dad, I love him. I love him. It's true." And he said, "Who?" "Oh, him, the handsome man." He said, "Well, there's no handsome man here. There are no men." I said, "What do you mean?" And that is when he revealed to her um, the spirit that was moving away from her down the mountain of Pikes Peak, and it was revealed to be the bear. She had fallen in love with the bear, and they had consummated their love, and he was off back to the forest where he belonged, and she was stuck, pregnant, and because of this, because she was pregnant with a being that was not from the celestial world, she could not return to the celestial world. It was a being that was between two worlds, the middle world and the upper world, and so she could not go back. And she eventually fell asleep, out of grief, out of heartache, because the bear was gone, and she was pregnant and she couldn't go home. She eventually fell asleep, and she still sleeps to this day. And she is actually the majority of Pikes Peak. That's her. But in her sleep, she did bear the first Ute people, and they came from that union of the bear and the daughter of the creator. At least that's how the one creation myth goes. I'm sure there are many others, and I don't certainly claim to be any sort of expert on the history of the Ute people, but anyway, we have that image that I vaguely alluded to earlier of the bear being a creature between two worlds. When we oftentimes talk about animism, we have this way of hand waving and just saying, "Oh, yeah, everything's alive." It's very popular for people now to identify as animists and just say, "Oh, everything's alive." Well, great, but I'm not disagreeing with you. But the quality of aliveness varies. Things are all alive, but we're alive differently, right? There are spiritual beings like fairies, which are said to live in grave mounds and can make themselves invisible. There are the elves in Iceland, which are so small, which is why you can't see them. There's the kobolds and the gnomes in Switzerland that have their magic hats that turn them invisible. What's true to all of these is that they are invisible to the naked eye. Be it because they live underground, be it because they turn themselves invisible, be it because they're teeny tiny, or they only come out at night. These beings are invisible. And the way the Tibetan tradition explains this is that they're spiritual beings. And although they may have traces of physical bodies, we're talking on an atomic level. These beings mostly exist incorporeally, the same way that a ghost does. And the quality of something like that, being alive, is very different to something like you or me, which has a spirit, which can be developed, but which is always kind of tethered to the body, even in such experiences like we know from later medieval folklore about Norse Seder, where somebody would send their spirit out. It is still always tethered to the human body. And then on the opposite side, you have something like a rock. And it's undeniable that a rock has an incredibly powerful body. And some rocks are spiritually very active. I think that's where a lot of people get that whole crystal thing. A lot of people love working with the energies of crystals and rock because the spirits of those are incredibly well developed. But some rocks don't have that. They're just physical. And so I think when we say that everything is alive, we are acknowledging the life inherent to all things, but to just hand wave and say, oh, it's all alive, you can interact with it all the same way, I think is a very great oversimplification. There's different tiers and gradients for this, and you can dwell too deeply on all the minute categories. And what we need to understand is that they're all external categories, right? Whether I sit here and I divide elves, dwarves, nagas, trolls, giants, ogwipeds, titans, gods, devas, asuras, whether I sit here and I divide all of these, it's not going to reflect their lived reality either. These spirits are truly alive, as we know them to be, then they have their own kingdoms, they have their own internal politics, they have their own power struggles, they have their own territories, right? And so these beings are alive, these spiritual beings. And I think by just saying, oh, everything's alive, blah, 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 it's about how I interact with them, we're making the whole thing us focused, which is not what animism is like in any living culture. Although I do see some people in more reconstructionist movement drift towards that, which is fine. We don't have that experience to draw upon. But whereas there's different degrees of living, and the human is a physical being that is capable of great spiritual things, we have to look at how we see the bear, especially if we take the Ute version. The bear is a being of this world, but like everyone who ever lied to you during your childhood, the bear sleeps for 6 months a year. That is 6 months of spiritual work. That is 6 months of astral travel. And look, I get it doesn't really work that way, but it actually makes the metaphor better, right? If the bear slept for 6 months, then we just say, oh, the bear's a sleepy boy or girl, or, but that's not the case. The bear enters a trance-like state, conserves energy, but is still conscious to a certain degree. And in this regard, they are just a little less tethered to the world than we are. And I think that's one of the things we find impressive about them. There's so many similarities to them, from them to us, if you're looking very broadly. But if you are an individual who's out in the forest, we're not going to encounter any apes. You're not going to encounter any chimpanzees. You're not going to encounter any bonobos, but you may find some similarities with, dogs, wolves, right? But the animal that is closest to you, to the point where it's almost eerie, is the bear. It's bigger, it's stronger, it's spiritually more developed. And so we kind of come to see them as the opposite, the cousin, the thing that's a step removed. There's a great many folklore tales in Switzerland that deal with either a rogue man, a violent man who can only be tamed by tricking him into fighting a bear, and then they both kill each other, or a rogue bear, a man eater, someone who breaks into various barns and steals chickens, uh, who can only be stopped by releasing the village's most violent man upon him. And again, it's mutually assured destruction. The human and the bear keep each other in check. And that's also something that we see in the Siberian systems, specifically those of the north, among the Nenets and the Evenk. We see that a bear is oftentimes seen as the punisher of men. Um, and that is, someone who breaks societal convention in a very negative way, in a harmful way, an individual that seeks to violate the bonds of honor, trust, hospitality for personal gain. A person that's a danger to the community will oftentimes meet their end at the hand of a bear. And the same way that if a bear breaks convention, and it starts to become violent and destroy things for the pleasure of it, um, then it is oftentimes tasked to a group of hunters or even a solitary hunter to eliminate the thing. And so what I'm getting at with this is that we have a close, almost familial relationship. And in many systems, we see that the bear is often a mother, sometimes a father, um, or even, the bear takes the role of an adopted father, very similar to how, um, Romulus and Remus are raised by the she-wolf. We see in folklore of the Netherlands, southern Germany, and Switzerland that there are various heroes or just admirable individuals who are in close contact with a bear or who are raised by a bear. And we also see that trope come into some of the fairy tales where uh, a young woman is married to a bear, and by marrying the bear, she returns him back to a prince or a war hero or an ancient Roman general who'd been cursed thousands of years ago. These are all stories that happen, and it's very similar how in Finland, sometimes a young girl is symbolically, or I almost shouldn't say is. I'm unsure how much it's still practiced. I know there are some people in Finland bringing it back and they're doing great work, but I can say at least historically, there's a folk practice to marry a young girl symbolically to the forest and the bear that lived inside the forest, because then you had a marriage pact, which again leads to the fact that in many cultures we see them as related enough. They're symbolically married, and now the bear won't hurt us because we're family. And this is the impression we really get from Arito and most of us who have prayed to her or worked with her, because again, we don't get much from just the imagery depiction, but that big she bear, the mother who looks out for us, the woman looking at the bear, and the bear looking at the woman, and the woman that the bear's looking at is a Magna Mater. So she's protective. She is very, very powerful, and she has a motherly energy. So I'd say that that's the very first thing I think we tie to it. Because of our close relationship to bears. What's a stronger mother than a bear? That's why we even have the idea of like bear mom, right? That's a thing we say today. Um, People who mama bear, papa bear, these are still positive labels that we place on people when it comes to their parental devotion. So a goddess like that, a friend like that,
Yeah.
that's
And
amazing.
absolutely. And very I love that story, by the way, the Ute story. Um, yeah, absolutely beautifully told. And but yeah, the even in nature we see the mature like the fact that the reason that we have colloquial terms like oh she's a mama bear is the when we look in nature just male bears will often target other the cubs of another bear so they kind of because if in I need to double check this. So I'll take this with a grain of salt. That when a she bear has cubs, her body essentially shuts down until those cubs kind of leave the mother and they're able to survive on their own. Then their body goes back into they're physically able to breed again. But while they have cubs, they're not able to do that. So the cubs are often targeted by other male bears who are wanting to reproduce. So like, okay, there's this female bear. I need to take care of these cubs, and that way I can give her my cubs, and so my bloodline goes on and all that. So that's why we see that mother bears are not only protecting their cubs from uh, things like mountain lions or hunters of various kinds, but they are constantly having to defend their cubs against male bears, which could be bigger than them sometimes, and it's that for the ferocity because I've seen different videos of mother bears, grizzly bears, black bears, what have you, going to just great lengths to protect those cubs. The maternal
Mm.
instinct there is powerful, and even in like a YouTube video or a TikTok video, you can see that when it happens, and and in uh, in one story here, I was pulling up as you were talking the story of Callisto from Greek mythology, who, nymph who was punished by Hera for Zeus doing Zeus stuff, according to according to the lore. So she was turned into a bear and is essentially because her Callisto's son doesn't know that she's been turned into a bear, so he thinks his mother has been devoured by this bear. So we kind of it's essentially the plot of Brother Bear, just kind of swapped around a little bit. Um, but the even though Callisto is in this bear form, she will not harm her own child. And when the day comes that her son, is about to land the killing blow, she is rewarded by Artemis, who is kind of like kind of a cognate, kind of a she's by some people she is synchronized with Artio because of the bear aspects, the kind of protective, feminine goddess aspects. But she rewards Callisto by setting her into the sky as the Ursa Major constellation, and that's why I myself personally kind of through that kind of synchronicity, the constellation of Ursa Major is linked to Arctio, but that is I'm not saying that everyone believes that same thing. That's just me personally.
No, but I get what you're saying. Yeah, and like I said earlier too, we have the Ursa Major, the Bear Star. When I was studying with my Mongolian teacher, there's a ceremony that I was given, and inside that ceremony, you mentioned, the Great Bear Star in space, because again, the bear Ursa Major is tied to that in Buddhism and shamanism and Taoism, that very auspicious symbol that in the West has a very stale taste in our mouth. But that's tied intrinsically to Ursa Major, which is tied also very much to um, the the creation of the celestial bear. I mean, that's a motif that exists everywhere. Although the stories may not be the same, we at least have a common human interpretation of that constellation as the bear. So I can totally see it with Arito as well. We have her maternal qualities, her spiritual qualities, her celestial qualities, her combat qualities. I mean, yeah, and again, probably one of the reasons that I think that she is faring very well recently. is because just like Carnonos, um, people nowadays really, really like that kind of human depiction. You know, I think the reason Carnonos does so well as our PR guy for Galpol is because of the horns. It's because of the horns that people want to know. You know, it's the reason that Jai Hanuman um, has become one of the most popular deities across so many different Indian peoples is, you know, the fact that he is a monkey man. You know, if you've recently seen Dave Patel's movie Monkey Man, oh, it is amazing, and it's one of the reasons, you know, that which drew me to him as well, is that like other than human feature. It's a reason that that Ganesha or Ganapati is now, you know, has his own religious movement which depicts him as the head central deity, and even in the one that doesn't, you know, in the Shaivite and Vaishnavite traditions, he is incredibly popular and incredibly well loved, and even within Buddhism, you know, Ganesha is incredibly popular, because again we have that other than human quality, um, but still not so far away that it's unrelatable. It's not you know, an abstract concept. And I also think that's why as kids, you know, we all had that Egyptian mythology book that you crack open, and you know, for some people it's Horus, for some people it's Anubis. For me it was Sobek, uh, the Lord of Seamen, but not for that reason. I just like crocodiles. Hmm. Mom, if you're
I,
listening, that's why. Um, but you know, it's that other than human quality that it draws in there, and I think Arito fits squarely into that camp, and that's a big appeal. The same appeal I think that Epona has as being connected so much to the horse. You know, and we see goddesses that are related to Epona. I won't say cognates or avatars or whatever because that all gets so mucky and into interpretation. But we see, you know, Rhiannon is so heavily involved with a horse. Um, you know, and again, that's one of the qualities that draws us towards them. Um, yeah, I want to read a quick piece of Swiss folklore. It's called The Bear's Son, and it actually deals with that very close familial relationship. And we actually have a um, a story of a man who is raised by a bear spirit and then goes off to become one of those ruffians, but a ruffian to beat all other ruffians. And because it's folklore, you're going to see Germanic, Celtic, and Catholic. I'll say Catholic instead of a specific culture. You'll see what I mean when we get to it. Elements, and you'll also see some Slavic influence in terms of structure. It's very similar to some Russian and Slovenian folklore. So yeah, without any other ado, this is the Bear Son or Barason, and it's from Switzerland, and it is from the canton of, I think it's Zurich, so Zurich. But okay, and without any other ado, if I can open it, here's my not so dramatic reading of this. A father and a mother once worked at the edge of a large forest, an old forest. While they were working, their little one slept under a great old ash tree. But in this forest was the old bear, and when the parents left him all day for working, she came and dragged him to her cave. When the parents had finished their work, they noticed the child was missing. They went searching for the child, but in vain. The bear has taken our little one, the father told his mother. We'll never see him again. The bear did not only take the little one, the bear took care of the little one. She took him to her breast every day, and every day he drank. After 5 years, one day she went with him into the forest, showed him a mighty fir tree, and said, Tear out this little dancer. And the boy tugged and he pulled and he peeled at the bark and pulled the branches, but he couldn't do it. You little one, you haven't sucked enough yet on the chest. Back you go, said the bear. I cannot wean you yet. After 5 years, The bear let the little guy try again to see if he could tear out the mighty old fir tree, but he couldn't. His nails broke on the bark. The twigs snapped in his hands. The stem wouldn't move. Ah, I still have yet to suckle you a little. You haven't sucked enough, said the bear, and she gave him her chest for another 5 years. Now, the lad had torn out the fir tree with the root and everything on it next time they went into the forest. His hands crushed the twigs. His arms uprooted every last root. The bear liked that, and she told him, "Now you may go home. Now you know." And that is what he did. He took the fir tree up in one hand as a staff or cudgel, and he went back to his people. His mother did not recognize him and thought his son a stranger, but she saw a weary stranger, a dirty stranger, a stranger come in from travel. And as was the rules of her land, if he demanded something to eat, she would have to give it to him. And so he did. He demanded something to eat, and that's when his mother went to get a loaf of bread from the cupboard. As she disappeared inside the house, he swept down all of her remaining provisions with his fir tree. He knocked down the jams and the jellies and the butters and all of the biscuits, and he ate them up. Then he went down into her wine cellar, and he brought out the biggest barrel. He tore off the spout, and with a single gulp drained the entire barrel. And that's when his mother returned, scolding her unwanted guest. "You fox, you devil." She chased him out of the house. The bear's son ran out of his father's home and into the mountains. There he found a pack of geese, and quickly with his hands he broke them. He carried his burden on his back all the way home, walking with his fir cudgel. He threw the geese through the kitchen window and yelled at his mother, "Here is meat for the little bread and drop of wine I drank." He spat at their door and walked away. In a foreign country, he hired himself as a servant. As a reward, he demanded nothing but be allowed to hit his master on the back. But when the Lord realized what terrible power his servant had, for he had seen him tear out trees to make his bed and knock over boulders to clear the field, and the mighty cudgel in his hand, he was scared and regretted having hired him for this payment. And the master thought day and night how he could, as in Switzerland we say, take him around the corner. So basically, cheat him. All the while, the boy did tend the field. One day, the master said, "I need flour, but there is no flour anywhere in the world. The only place they have flour is hell." And so the young boy said, "I will go to hell." Then the master agreed. Yes, yes, you should get the flour from the devils, because the devils had taken his wheat and ground it into flour. And so, in order to send the boy on his way, he gave him some bags that he had. But the boy said, 4 bags of flour from the devil himself? This will not do." He walked into his master's barn, and there he said, as he beheld his 2 prized oxen, "Ah, These are some proper bags. And the boy grabbed the oxen by the horns and crushed their skulls with his hands. He smashed the two oxen and pulled off their skins. He then sewed them into a bag. Leaving his master behind, he then went to hell and demanded flour. The devil, and here's a fun part, devil's plural, because in Swiss folklore, there's not a singular devil. There's a class of beings, the devils. And the devils had a laugh and said he was a fool to come all this way down to hell, and that now, because he had entered into their territory, he belonged to them. But the boy was not here to fool around. So he grabbed the devils and he pressed on their faces and he beat them with his hands and he crushed their skulls in such a way that they were black and blue. He then commanded them to fill his bag of flour and carry it to the surface for him. In the evening, he came home with his sack carried by the devils and told the master that the devils are uncouth and very, very poor millers. The flour was a very poor quality. Next time, he should give the grain to someone else to grind, a more capable person nearby. The master said, "Oh, next time, I'll send him to hell to get some money. I mean, you can live off of flowers, but the money they have down there." So he sent his servant to hell for a second time, this time to get money. But when he arrived down there, the devils had still not recovered from their recent beating. They had brown and blue spots from the last time, and he knew that his muscles were strong and his hands fierce and violent. And they gave him all the money of the sinners that he wanted. When the master saw the servant coming up from hell with so much money, the master got scared. Oh no. But since the year of service had come to an end, which he had agreed upon, before the master could protest or ask for any of the money, the servant knocked the master upside his head so hard that he spit blood and vomit for 7 days. This is a story from the past. And that's how it ends. So again, we
That's
see
awesome.
a very, very violent hero who has become incredibly strong through the raising and the tutelage of the bear spirit who lives in the forest. And so much to the fact that again, he's given, although it's not stated, almost spiritual powers. He descends into the underworld and robs them of grain and treasure, two of the biggest motifs of underworld journeys. He goes down there and he just beats the snot out of everybody and comes up. And I mean, this small child left by negligent parents becomes a very, very powerful individual through his relationship with the forest spirit, you know? So it's a very fun story. And though I'm not saying that it's directly tied to Arito, it certainly does fit the bill, I think, especially since we do have another Gaulish deity attested, whose name literally translates as bear son, right?
Yeah, Matutinus. And actually, something you had touched on earlier was the kind of admiration, respect, but also kind of warranted fear of bears that they're I refer to them as taboo words where it's I believe it's an animistic kind of principle where if you did not want to invoke a particular animal or spirit of an animal, you would not say its name directly. So rather than avoiding the
Mm.
word Artos, which is the Proto-Celtic word for bear, they would sub it out with Matu, which is kind of it essentially means like happy or glad. So
Yeah, the
yeah,
glad
there's
one, right? But we even see that. I mean, bear is not the word for bear, right? Bjorn is
yeah,
not the word for bear. It means brown one. And that comes
yeah,
from that same place. And I'll say the taboo um is probably not a lot about animals because we see it with other religious systems. I mean, there are strong pointings to the fact that many gods in ancient systems have many names. I mean, Persephone, at least in Mycenaean Greece, is just known as she or her. You wouldn't
Mhm.
say her name. You didn't want to get her attention if you could avoid it. That's the same reason that the Buddhist deity Chakrasamvara and Vajrayogini are referred to as father and mother. Blue father, red mother. You want to get their attention if you can avoid it. It's the same reason why, perhaps Wodan is called the Furious One or he who is Fury, because saying, oh, the Furious One is better, which again points at the, religious respect towards bears, even so much that it is very easy for us to see the divine quality within them. And therefore, a bear-shaped goddess makes incredible amounts of sense.
And like the concept of like the taboo of saying as some a entity's direct name. I mean, it's we there was literally a Beetlejuice sequel. The whole concept of Beetlejuice
Yeah,
is
I
that you
heard they're
don't say
making
his name.
that.
I heard it. I've heard mixed reviews. A lot of good, a little bit of bad. But I haven't seen it yet myself. But yes, I mean, literally, you have this, modern day, popular figure where like the key element about him is that you do not say his name directly because it brings him into your life for him to
Hmm.
cause all kind of Michael Keaton chaos.
Yeah,
Um,
well, it's the same. You know that saying, "Speak of the devil," right? And the whole saying is,
yep,
"Speak of the devil, and he shall appear." There's
exactly.
the reason that so many folk spirits have dozens and dozens of names is because many times one of those becomes something else. The same reason where at least I've heard some people mention that Hermes even came into existence as an independent deity was because it was a different name for Pan. And then the original Pan split into Pan and Hermes. Um, and the same way that we see sometimes, I'm going to reference a very obscure text, but the Historia Gentribus Septernalibus, which is a medieval account of the folk practices that still existed in Scandinavia. And we're talking after the Eddas, we're talking like the 1500s. And it's very curious that he mentions that there are two deities. There are three main deities that the folks worship. They're the king of the gods, Thor, um, Frigga, um, that's how he spells it, and then Othin, right? The war god. So he says Othin is the war god. He dresses like Mars, and in the woodcuttings that accompany that text, he's depicted in full Roman armor with a sword. That's Wodan. He's the war god, um, or Odin, I should say. But then he lists three lower deities, and these deities are Freyr. They are uh, a, a deity which roughly translates to Finn shaman. So we have no idea what that is supposed to be. And then there's Mythodin, which means magic Odin. So Odin and Magic Odin, which are listed as separate deities, and they're depicted identical, except that Myth Odin's sword is a little smaller than regular Odin's. So again, we have even in folklore, how things change from one to the next through name taboos. You get Magic Odin, a being who might have been Tyr, a being that might have been, in my personal opinion, probably Uller, because we get in Saxo, we get Oleros, which is just a romanization of Uller, and we're told that Uller casts terrible spells and he knows hideous runes. Um, so we see that Uller might have had some magic connotations, and then yet again, we launch into, where is that line between Odin and Uller? Because we see in Norway there was one area that was very heavily Odin and one heavy area that was very heavily Uller, and in the middle there is an area where most names, place names that are based on gods are Ulin. I'm like, oh, what's that? Is that like a middle ground? Did one of these develop out of a taboo? Is it a blending of identity? I mean, we really, that identity stuff is flexible sometimes, and especially
Oh
when we
yeah.
consider, concepts that are prominent in other polytheistic religions, but less common in our modern reconstructions when we consider, avatars and emanations and splitting and joining. The fact that Kali and Durga can be the same goddess, but can also exist independently at the same time next to each other. Because again, talking about that animist sliding scale, if you don't have a physical body, it's very hard for us with our limited understandings to say, oh, well, so and so. The same way that people oftentimes say, oh, it's totally wrong. Odin is Thor's dad. Thor can't be Odin's dad. And you're like, yeah, but when they don't have physical bodies, what is a familiar relationship? Does it
Yeah,
describe power structures? Does it describe uh, orders of coming into existence? We may never know. There's tons of theories about this, but and that's the same thing. Was Arito a bear? Was she a woman? Is she a bear? Is she a woman? Is she both? So I do kind of really like the depiction of the bear facing the woman's, even though it may have arisen from some, very Roman centric censorship of Celtic imagery. I love the idea of the two natures in there.
exactly. And that's and it's. I mean, like I've caught myself just sitting and just staring at that image and kind of and like now I have to like really like look at it again because I didn't know about because that's news to me about the fact that the bear was possibly rearranged and put into a different spot. I mean, that's fantastic.
Hmm.
And I to stay on uh brain fart. So there is so we had we mentioned Matutinus, who is a another bear deity who I'm going to try to get some research and try to get an article written on him at some point. But there's a third who I've had conversations with people about whether or not RTO is along the same lines of what you were just talking about, but like whether RTO and Darta are two separate individuals, or is it two fandoms describing the same goddess? Because she is because in Darta her name essentially means uh, like I'm looking it up right here. It's like a great bear or
Yeah, look that up because your idea of fandoms always inspires me, because um you bring up a good thing, we can use comic books as a comparison. You have Superman, Sentry, Omni-Man, and Homelander, and those are different things that are the same vibe that all influence each other, right? But
yeah,
then you also have, you know, Superman from the Justice League cartoon, Superman from the Snyder movie, Superman from Christopher Reeves, Superman from the video games, Superman from The Adventures of Superman and Lois Lane, which, by the way, if you have not watched it, do. It's Magical Girl Sailor Moon style, but with Superman. Jimmy Olsen is the best rendition of Jimmy Olsen we have ever gotten on a TV show, and Lois Lane is a badass. Watch the show; it is amazing. Um, anyway, side tangent. But then you also do have, different fandoms and different authors interpretations of the same thing. And then you even have weird spin-off what if universe. What if these two characters were one? What if they met? And you have all sorts of flexible identities. Which we'll reference back to this when we get to our syncretism episode.
mhm,
Um, but again, and the reason I want to establish this as well is, um, to kind of lead into the validity of a lot of these other more universal patterns. When we have a deity like Arito, about which we have so little, it can be helpful. You don't have to, but it can be helpful to look at common universal trends and folklore trends and see what do people think about bears now and in the past, because it seems to be that throughout most of human history, our ideas of bears have been pretty consistent. And in that
mhm.
way, it can inform us so much about a goddess whose name is not only bear, but who was probably pictured as a bear. Did
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
find the name of the other deity?
So yeah, there's Matutinus and Andarta, and the etymology of her name is powerful bear. So rather, because I thought it was
Yeah.
great bear, but Mara is kind of the word for great, but yeah, Andarta is a powerful bear, and I believe again right up there with Metriton is someone who I want to do a deeper dive into personally, but. From what I've seen off the top of my head, she's got a lot more hunting and even like military, like warlike aspects to her. Whereas we really don't see that with Artio, with the exception of that she is very defensive of her cubs, her children, and because we have this, like you were mentioning earlier, the hibernation aspect where she is kind of a liminal being almost, where she is present in the physical sense, but also present in like the subconscious. She's kind of like someone who is in a meditative trance-like state and possibly like a dream-like, entity. So that's why I've always argued that Andarta and RTO are two separate individuals rather than two aspects of one figure. Um, but that's just me
Yeah, and
personally. 'Cause, yeah,
but
if
that's the
someone
thing
else,
that we'll
if
see with regular, engaging with this deity. People might reach different conclusions. People might reach some, but especially about deities like this, you got to get your feet wet. That's why
oh
I
yeah,
hope this episode can serve as initial inspiration, but I hope that people can go out there and see how they're drawn to these deities and how they relate to each other. And if you find that you vibe more with one than the other, well, there you go.
oh yeah. And on that note, like both of us definitely encourage people to, like you said, get your feet wet and reach out to RTO, see if there is like a bond or a relationship there. I myself, like RTO was that for when I started my path into polytheistic paganism, she was there from the get go before I even thought about going in a Gaulish and from Gaulish into a more alpine, focus practice. She's still there with me today. Whenever I need parenting kind of advice, I will often pray to her, or I will do a ritual to like for parental wisdom, and she's usually right whenever I do get a message. But I do have two stories of when I definitely made mistakes, and she scolded me like a mother would, and I think I told one of them. I think I
Gotta
told
love
one
it.
of them. I told one of them I think on the podcast before, but it doesn't hurt. It does not hurt me to repeat it. But so I've noticed her kind of not punishments, but her like now what did you learn is usually giving me a very almost violent flu for about 24 hours. This has happened to me twice now. There was one day where usually when I do offerings to RTO, it's usually my go-to is some kind of fish covered in honey. And
Mm.
like and leaving it out and doing like because I have a little fire pit in my backyard, so I'll do a burnt offering of that. Well, there was one day I wanted to do a quick offering before I went to work, and I was running late, so I instead of like maybe what I'll do it when I get back from work, so I have more time to kind of focus on it. I decided to like grab the first thing of leftovers that were in my fridge and make that as an offering, and they happened to be green beans. And not very shortly after I made my offering outside, not as a burnt offering, I just left it outside. I was going to clean it up later. I hadn't even gotten out to the car before I was all of a sudden throwing up and needing to use the bathroom ASAP. And within 24
Jeez.
hours, within 24 hours, I was back to normal. My second incident was I had been going with a theory that the different stars of Ursa Major were representations of different children of Artia, and I was
Ooh,
trying to
buddy, we're
use.
we're gonna, we're gonna talk about that in a second. I got some stuff to say on that.
I know I figured I wanted to save the second one specifically as a setup for you. So uh, I was trying to figure out who these children were. Now I was maybe a couple years into my practice, and I was trying to use divination as a way to kind of reach out and contact to get some kind of solid answers. And Not only do I have Elder Futhark runes and some tarot cards, but I also have Lepontic runes. Now, after my first attempt to try to reach out to RTO, like, tell me about your kids. Um, I woke up and somehow one of my Lepontic runes had come out of its bag that has a drawstring on it, and somehow wound up under my back, and it was the Lepontic rune Iagus, which typically has the representation of patience and not right now. And that should have been a very clear, very, 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 very clear message of let's not talk about my kids right now. Maybe mind your own business for right now and focus on other things. I didn't take that. I didn't observe that message right away. So when I tried to reach out again, um, again, not long afterwards, I was violently sick. I was shooting out both ends. I was in bed for 24 hours. To which I was back on my feet again, like nothing had ever happened a day later. And that was when I finally learned, okay, I need to listen to Mother Bear when she says, stop doing what you're doing.
Yep.
So yeah, those are my two don't piss off RTO stories.
Yeah. I am currently, because now you've got me on something. This is something we've never talked about before. But
Ooh.
now you've got me on. Um, okay, let's see. Big, Big Dipper Sutra. Mongolian Big Dipper Sutra. Let's check here. Because I think this will give us a really cool thing. Okay, so this is sutra, and a sutra text is in Buddhism. It is a text that doesn't need empowerment or specific teaching. Like anyone can read this. So I want to pull up at first. Um, Let's see if they give us a list of names here. Let me see if I can find. I was hoping that they would give us. Okay. So there's a lot of really fun ways you could take this because now we're just jumping straight into theory crafting. Um, but the idea of the Big Dipper representing seven deities is actually incredibly common. We see it in Buddhism, we see it in Hinduism, we see it in um, the Mongolian shamanism, and we see it in uh, the Japanese, some Japanese Shinto religions. And here's a really fun one. I just found this. So it says that there's a worship of a deity called Myoken, and Myoken is an amalgamation of the Shinto deity Myoken Shin and the deity of the northern polar star, Little Dipper. So you have polar star in there, which can lead us very much into uh, uh, the celestial worship that way. Um,
Okay.
we also have the fact that in Hinduism, the seven stars of the Big Dipper are seen as seven sages: Brigu, Atri, Angesa, Vaishvata, Purshana, Pulana, and Kratu. And then in Mongolia, it is said that the seven stars are the seven grandfathers who govern one's fate. And depending upon your birth year, you are assigned to a specific guardian star. Um, yeah, my personal one is the third, the one that's right down there in the corner. So it's really cool how uh, you came to that, but it seems to be a very
Huh.
common trend, and they're all related. The seven grandfathers in that same ceremony I mentioned, where it says, my great polar bear star. Um, it also says, "Oh, seven grandfathers who govern our fate." So it's acknowledged that the the spirit of the celestial bear is made up of the seven sages, of the seven ones who guard fate. So it's fun again that you're touching on something that seems to be a very deep underlying trend, a pattern that humans have recognized. And that's how you can do a bit of your reconstruction as well. Your own conclusions don't need validity, I think, in terms of cross referencing. If you have your own gnosis that's based on other things, or, you know, maybe your own personal connections, that's perfectly fine. But if you're looking for a jumping off point, then dialogue with other systems is phenomenal because it can reach you to
Abs-
bring you to this kind of stuff.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I had no idea about any of that.
Yeah,
That's fantastic. I like that.
that's just because
Yeah.
I'm yeah, part of and studying two traditions that are intimately tied to to the star constellation, and I didn't even think of it until you brought it up just now.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, and then
Yeah.
can probably share my experience too that I've had with the bear mother. And for me it was, stepping into from a Western reconstructionist, stepping into a lot of these living traditions, sometimes even, ethno religions. Um, I've recently, I've studied with a Mongolian shaman. I have studied with a Nganazan shaman. I have studied with a Bun lama. I've studied with several Tibetan lamas. I've read a lot um, on different spiritual systems as well. Um, but what was hard for me was when it came to the actual practice. Learning from people who had lived this religion, who came from a culture where that religion was a part of, and that was something. Stepping into a Mongolian system, um, a big part of that is ancestor worship, right? And I don't have Mongolian ancestors. Try as I might, being a shaman is something that you are called to from birth. It is a cultural thing, it is an ancestral thing, and there are shamans that are born outside of their lineages. I know shamans that are white dudes from the middle of Europe, or they're part of Asian spiritual systems, but she may be someone who lives in Brazil and was born and raised there. I mean, sometimes it happens, but generally it doesn't. Something that you're born into. And while I found that I definitely had an affinity, and there were a lot of things from the system that I could learn, in terms of actual ability, what I was really there for was looking for that sticky animist glue, that like little bit that you can't get from just piecing things together, that lived experience. And it's tricky because I realized I hit a ceiling. There were certain things that I could not do. And so I pretty much put out a call. I was like, hey, systems that I have worked with, like things who are related tangentially, who can bridge the gap for me here, that would be appreciated. And I've shared this story before on other podcasts, but the first person to show up was Gaut, or Gautir, or Gupt as he's known, who is a Germanic being, god, ancestor, all of the above. Eventually, an aspect of Odin, but not sure if he originated that way. But from the Gothic people, and the Gothic people hung around with the Huns for a long time. So it was a way for me to get my sea legs dealing with a Mongolian system. Who the Mongols are related to the Huns, culturally more than genetically, but still, a lot of the same concepts. So that was a way for me to gain my sea legs. And then the same thing happened when I stepped into an Afghanistan system. I was like, there's not a lot here. And I had previously had a relationship with Uller, and Uller is kind of sort of related to the conception that the Norse had about the Sami and the Finns. So I was like, but the Nganasan system was so bear centric that Arito came up very quickly. And through her and working with her, I was able to like, find a compatible way. And again, I'm not a shaman. I've not been recognized as a shaman in any of those systems, but it's allowed me to live the experience far more and to learn and be able to perform far more. And I ended up having an initiation with a bear spirit because of my relationship to Arito. And so I had actually gone up to the mountains. This was after a particularly heavy ritual I had done. I had connected someone to their ancestral spirits, which funnily enough, I see it kind of as the work I have to do in order to give back. I'm a white dude from Switzerland living in primarily white America, and I'm learning all these Asian spiritual systems, and the majority of people that I end up helping with them are from Asian diaspora communities. People that are like, hey, we've lived in America for a few generations. I'm having trouble connecting with my ancestry. What do you want to do? And I was like, don't worry about it. So I gladly take those cases. I maintain the traditional way where I don't charge people. It's on like a donation basis. It works out sometimes. Work doesn't work out other times, but oftentimes what I find myself is end up, bridging those gaps, which is kind of the way of giving back to that. But I did end up having a bear initiation because I had reconnected someone with their ancestor spirits. And yeah, that was a lot of work. It's a lot of heavy lifting. And so I went up to the woods for almost a week, and I set up my yurt and I was camping out there. I was doing ceremony every morning, ceremony every night, and I was offering to the the fairies and all the other local spirits. And this was actually the mountain right next to Pikes Peak. So I would walk up there and I would turn and I would offer to Sunawik's daughter and the spirits who currently live in and on Pikes Peak, as well as Pikes Peak itself. I did ceremonies for them. Um, and I was at a place where I was like, this kind of sort of stuff is hard. I'm doing my approximation of it. And I need to figure out a real thing here. And I had several really cool experiences on that trip, but my last one was, the day before I was going. Um, I had stayed throughout into the week until Tuesday night was my last day, but everyone else had left, and I was camping in kind of like a back country area, and so there was nobody else there, just me, a single park ranger for the whole national park. You can see where this is going. And I fell asleep, and I'm awoken at around 12 to outside my tent, followed by like a jaw snapping, and then the occasional and then my tent goes. See, earlier when I said I had a yurt, I lied. I'm not rich enough to afford a nice yurt. So what I have is a bell tent. And a bell tent almost looks like a yurt, except it doesn't have an internal frame. It's supported by external long tethers. Somebody was fucking with my tethers. They were pushing down. And I was like, what is a bear doing here? What does a bear want? And I turned to my fully stocked altar I have set up on the opposite side of the tent. There is my bear figure, my shamanic objects, my pagan objects, all of the grease I brought to lather the shamanic objects, all of the milk I brought for shamanic. And I went, oh, fuck. I am an idiot. And I went, okay, you know, the bear's probably attracted by these. Now these things were, it was like olive oil and like fermented milk, not something that like I think a bear would want to eat, but I had him in the tent. So I was like, and because the milk was on, it wasn't like in a container. It was, I had already been rubbed on the statues. So I like had statues, I had a little container of oil and they'd been rubbed with milk. So I was like, okay, cool. Maybe that's what he's here for. But he never went around to that side of the tent. He was where I was on my side of the tent. And I was like, okay, cool. I'll wait till he goes away. That's 5 minutes. It's 15 minutes. And it's 20 minutes. And this bear is still going. And then he starts leaning on the tent. I suspect not with his hands because he didn't tear through it, but just like in my mind, it's like a shoulder lean and he's going. So I turn on all the lights and I was like, this is it. And I start banging and I go, hey, bear, get out of here. Ah! It's quiet. Then I hear, and it starts happening again. And I was like, fuck, I whip out my phone. I Google frantically. I'm like, how long for bear to lose interest? Hiking alone, bear lose interest how long? And it's like, oh, bear will lose interest in about 5 to 10 minutes unless it's predating you. And I look at my clock and it's been well over 30 minutes and I'm going, fuck. I was like, if this bear tears through the tent and the tent collapses, I'm done. Like, this is it. So I'm like, I look over and at my altar, I have a ritual sword. I go, okay. And it's a sword that's specifically made for like banishing spirits. And I pick up the sword. I strap every sweater I have onto me, wrap a scarf around my neck because I'm like, look, I'm at least not going to make it easy. I put on my headlamp and I take my phone and I turn on the flashlight and I stick it in the headlamp and I tear open the front of the door. I come out and I start yelling. And I kick up dirt and I am like beating the ground with the sword. And I look, it's a bear. He's not as big as I thought he was. He's a black bear, and he's not a yearling because he's not with his mom, but he hasn't left her yet. He's like 2 years old, so the thing's like, maybe like 150 pounds or something. Probably eat me, but like still little. And he looks at me, and I look at him, and he goes, and I go, ah! And I kick dirt at him. And he turns tail and he runs back to the tree line. And then when he's by the tree line, he turns and his eyes glow. And I stand up taller than I was and I raise my sword over my head and I go, ah! He leaves. I go back inside the tent. I don't sleep all night. I'm just, what if the bear comes back? What if the bear comes back? And he didn't. But I was horrified. And it's very funny because in a lot of the traditional cultures, initiation with the bear spirit happens through a confrontation. And oftentimes the initiate um, fights a bear. In my case, it was a very small bear and a very pathetic attempt at a fight. Um, but oftentimes where the proof in the pudding is that, the bear is either killed, and harvested, or shortly thereafter a bear centric spiritual object, like a bear shaped rock or something, comes into your life, which then serves as the vessel for the bear spirit you have acquired. And I went home and I was like, oh, this. And then about a week later, I get a message on Facebook, and it's from a dude, and he's like, "Hey, I'm selling a bear pelt." I was like, "Oh, that's cool." I'm thinking, I'm like, "Oh yeah, cool. That'll look great." And my Viking, house decor. And I got a couple of statues, couple of arts. I got the Nibbling and Ring album covers up on the wall. I'm like, yeah, look great there. I'm sure we agree. And I'm like, how much do you want? And he's like, oh, what do you think's fair? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't have any money. I'm broke. And he was like, oh, Okay, well, we'll do, and some hilariously low ball thing. He just threw it out there. It was like if you know how much a bear pelt is, it was nothing. It was practically nothing. It was a little bit more than a tank of gas. And so I was like, oh, interesting. Okay, where are you located? He sends me his address. Cool. I don't look. I type it in, click, and I'm driving there. Got my kid with me. We stop at McDonald's. We have a fun time. We have a road trip. It's kind of a long drive, probably about 2 hours. And we're driving, and we're driving. I get rerouted because there's traffic. Okay, we're driving, we're driving. We're almost there, and the place is starting to look familiar. I was like, oh, that's weird. I think I've been in this town. And I drive through the town. And to my left is Pikes Peak. And I went, oh, shit. It's the same mountain. It's the opposite side of the mountain, but like, a 20-minute walk from where my camp was. And it's this dude, and he's alone in this giant, like, mansion, and it's completely vacant. He's the only dude there, and he has this bear pelt on the wall, and he's like, this is the last thing I had to get rid of. Come in. And he takes it off the wall and he hands it to me. And the only other thing he has in his living room is an old CD rack. He's like, "Do you want the CD rack?" I'm like, "No, I really don't. I'm good with the bear pelt. I don't want the CD rack." He says, "All right, well, suit yourself." And I leave. And so within that small window of time between the bear encounter and the acquisition of a full bear pelt, claws and everything, I'd later on discussed it with one of my teachers, and they were like, "Yeah, like this is a thing. This is a path you could go down. You have this now." Um, Ultimately, I decided on some other stuff just because, for in the West, we oftentimes have a very romantic opinion of shamanism, but shamanism is hard. Shamanism is demanding, and then this is not the podcast for that. But I encourage you to listen to people from traditional lineage systems. It's not something that's easy, and so ultimately, I decided that I was okay where I was at with my education in those systems, and I branched more off in other directions. Focused more on Buddhism and some other stuff, but that situation arose because I talked to Arito and I was like, hey, I need like a real thing. You're my only in here, and I need like a real thing. And she's like, I bet. Here's a 2-year-old bear. See if you can handle that. And I was like, barely. So
That's awesome. That was an amazing story. That's it definitely beats my green bean story.
yeah. No, but it's a lot of the same. I just used more details. I'm sure you could have used more details in your story as well. I also have a tendency to like meander and wander. But it's the exact same energy. She's like, "Oh, really? You're poking where you're not supposed to? Sit down." "Oh, really? You think you can handle it, big tough guy? Here's a little tiny bear. See how you do with that."
Yeah, no,
Like,
that's a fair point. Yeah.
it's the same energy. And for those people who want to worship Arito or incorporate her, that's the kind of energy I think that, at least from our experiences, we can tell you might happen to you. Some protection, some spiritual guidance, especially bridging if you're learning new systems that are related to her spheres, being able to branch into those, but also someone who will kick your butt, especially when it
Oh,
comes to, you maybe asking more than you can handle, maybe asking for lore you're not ready for, or asking for spiritual systems um, that later on you find are actually very, 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 very demanding and frightening. So
yes.
perhaps mother knows best. But this is the kind of mom that, when you say I'm running away from home, she says, "All right, cool, here you go.
Yeah. Give
Don't
it a
come back."
shot.
And then you come back and she's like, "I knew you would. Dinner's ready. Get inside. Don't do it
Yeah.
again."
Exactly. And that's the thing. Like, like her like test punishment, whatever, however you want to phrase it. They're not more than one. They're definitely overwhelming in the moment,
Hmm.
but like but like it's not like there's any kind of separation. Like like just like any good mother, she'll take you back after you've learned your lesson.
Exactly. She won't slap you down for being an insolent child. She does it so you know better, you know?
Yeah.
This is not
So
someone who's out for your damage. You know?
so you can learn. It's all about
Exactly,
learning
yeah.
and gaining that wisdom, even if it's like the hard way.
Yes, exactly. And that's just a wonderful quality. So, we have another thing to add to that, the tough lessons, the motherly stuff, the warrior spirit. And again, the warrior spirit even branches over into some stuff like the quintessential image of the barbarian, or the Norse Ulfedjar,
Mm.
the the warriors that are clad in bear skin, which are very similar to the berserker, in the wolf skin, but you have bears there too. Um,
Mhm.
and the fact that the bear deity we mentioned earlier, I think was also syncretized with Mercury, who at least in some classical sources is equated to Odin. So at least in vibes, there's
Oh yeah.
similar stuff there. There's some Odinic qualities. The last aspect I think I want to talk about is the bear as a symbol of the land, and I think that's another thing. We have
Mhm.
many deities that are representations, or I shouldn't say representations, animistic spirits of the land or governance of the land. In a lot of different Celtic regions, we see that oftentimes those gods or spirits are strongly related to horses. So we see, Rhiannon, we see a lot of the cave art from the Raetians, as well as some Irish folklore depicting a certain ritual that happens between an up and coming young chieftain and a mayor, I should say, that apparently they did back then. They're equivalent of, I don't know, some of those less savory acts. But again, that has a reference as well to rituals in the Vedas. Um,
Yeah, definitely some
where
of the definitely
a
some of
king
the
or a queen would lay with a horse in order to establish the dominion of the land. So, that seems to be the more
yeah.
dominant interpretation of the land, but we do also see the bear as the land sometimes, especially, when born from the womb um, of the being that lives here. Um, but also in some other um, cases. So I wouldn't say so much as a direct representation of rulership over the land. Because again, those are the more horse-oriented deities classically, and I can't think of any bear-oriented deities, but bears as guardians of the land. And where I particularly get this from is the Christianization of Switzerland. The second time, the first time it didn't stick, but the second time when Saint Gallus from Ireland came over, um, and that's a fun story too. All sorts of mixes. At some point, Saint Gallus heals someone's eyeball by invoking Govan, the Irish smithing god. So, and
Oh,
direct cognate to Gobanos, which then also leads us down the rabbit hole of smithing gods being healing gods, which is a whole nother one. Um, but yeah, it's very interesting. He meets two fairies and banishes them back to the Imlichberg, which is a folkloric magical mountain with various locations in Switzerland where Frau Holle or Woden live, but it's also a direct cognate to Heimdall's sphere of abode in Norse mythology. So there's fun stuff there. But essentially, when he arrives at Switzerland, he's not let in. There is a giant bear that is guarding his path, and she won't let him in. It's specifically a she bear. And in order to placate her, he gives her a loaf of bread. He essentially makes an offering to the guardian of the land, and she accepts. She takes the loaf of bread, and specifically, depending on the telling, she stands or sits when she eats it. Very human gestures. So she's like, okay, I'll take this. You're cool. And she lets him in to do his Christianization. And what that reads like to me is, whoever wrote it, propaganda, basically saying like, look, the boss of the area signed off on this. We're cool, like we came to the person. And so when it's not although she may not be tied directly to the land itself, we have that protective sphere, that idea of protecting the land and that idea of protecting a people or a group, which is also, again, where we tie into with the Ainu and a lot of other uh, Central Asian mythologies, where the bear is oftentimes seen as a family protector. In some places in Mongolia, they have a tradition of hanging a bronze mask in a yurt for the protector spirit, grandfather bear. And in Tibet, there is a very, very old tradition, and it's performed both by Bon Buddhist and the more animistic people there that don't really identify with Bon or Buddhism. But it's performed by all three of them, slightly variations. But you take a bear's skull and you would wrap it in cloth and plant it underneath, a spirit house, and the Buddhists will fill its mouth with like mantras and stuff. And essentially, the bear skull is then recruited. It's called back. It says, "Hey, you're not done. Stick around. Protect the place," and it's put back in there. Um, Also in Ganazan spirituality, which is, I don't know if I mentioned that before, but that's my Siberian teacher. And you will place bear skulls around the home, and they're seen as being tied to an individual. So each individual is represented by a corresponding bear skull for protection. So you have the bears being very, very protective elements of people, places, and things. So guardians. So I think that's another abode that at least resonates with me strongly with Arito. But mostly because I read the account of St. Gallus as being related to her, because where he enters Switzerland is very close to Muri. And so I tend to like to read it that way. But you may not, and that's okay too.
Yeah, no, that's it's got some validity in my eyes at least. But yeah, that's fascinating. And the you bring up the you brought up like kind of like mythological creatures and stuff like that earlier about how they're these this aspect of animism of it's more than just everything's alive. I think I've mentioned it to you at one point, but like I personally see a lot of cryptids, Bigfoot, and like that these are
Yeah,
not
we've been down this
phys
one. Yeah.
yeah, that these are not physical flesh and blood things, but rather they are spirits that can take on a non-corporeal or a physical form. But like with they, Bigfoot being a big one, especially out here in the Pacific Northwest, is
Oh
uh,
yeah, and wild men is like a common trope, right? The Romans had them, and it's still common in Central European folklore today. The hairy wild man um, that lives out in the forest and is giant and strong. Like that's a Bigfoot to a T. They have Bigfoot in Tibet. They have
yeah,
the
oh
Yeti.
yeah,
Yeah, so
well,
and that too is a seen at least in folk religion as a spiritual being.
yeah, and I think that definitely applies to a bear being associated with the land.
Mm.
I was trying to find things like uh, I heard there was something that came to mind was Steinbjorn, which I believe is Old Norse for stone bear. Which unfortunately, everything I was looking up kept leading me to Assassin's Creed Valhalla. But I was trying to see if I could
Oh,
find something.
sorry.
I was trying to see if I could
Yeah,
find something outside of Ubisoft, but I wasn't seeing it. But like it was such an interesting concept of a bear being made of stone and ice that protects kind of
hmm
the border between the Jotunheim and Midgard and whatnot. Unfortunately, I didn't see anything outside of that fucking game, uh,
Yeah,
but
the curse of pop culture, huh?
unfortunately, unfortunately, um, but the thing is, bears are all very often associated with forests and mountains, particularly. The in my WordPress thing on RTO, the fact that a cave is can be seen as kind of like a liminal space, and how a bear, for the most part, and even in nature, a bear is not going to a bear's going to stick to its territory. If you enter a bear's territory, it's going to defend it, and so that can definitely be seen in the animistic way as well.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, this was an absolutely fascinating episode on RTO, and uh, yeah, like there's a lot of things I need to think that I need to think about. I might update my article about too, because there was a lot that I didn't know that you, especially with the uh, like kind of Tibetan and Mongolian aspects. Absolutely fascinating. I had no
Hmm.
idea. So
And it's just, again, I'm not saying that Jung is right when it comes to archetypes and all that, but and I know that he wasn't like a stand-up guy either, but I do think that sometimes we have a tendency to throw anything that even vaguely smells of, a universal human experience into the dumpster.
yeah,
And I think in this case is it's just we notice very clear trends when it comes to the worship of bears and the way that bears feature in our subconsciousness, and the stars that they're tied to and the spheres that they have. And I just think that for reconstruction, these kind of trends are a great starting point, and you may find your own understanding develops independently of that, which is even better, as it should be.
yeah. And I think Carl Jung also inspired Joseph Campbell, who is someone who I know he's gotten a lot of criticism from other folklorists, but is there's still some information I find reliable, but it is something I do take with a grain of salt because the criticisms of him are fair, and even I'll admit that. Even though Joseph, I have like two different Joseph Campbell books now.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah. Anyway, yeah. Oh man, this was a great deep dive into RTO, and I can't wait to do.
Oh, wait, I have a small correction to
Oh,
issue. Um, Rudolf Steiner did come up with some ties to like bear worship, but it was actually Joseph Campbell. You said his name and it sparked something, so I had to look it up. It was
oh,
actually
okay.
Joseph Campbell that suggested the theory for the Ice Age bear cult religion by Neanderthals, specifically tied to these uh, these caves. And I actually did just say that I would look up the name of the cave. Um, so let me see what it says.
It's funny you brought up Rudolf Steiner earlier. That's actually a name I've recently learned about. So I was like, oh, I remember that name.
Yeah, Steiner's, I mean, the whole theosophy movement, that's a weird one to get into. It's definitely above my pay grade. But,
Oh yeah.
it's funny because you see just how much influence they took from Tibetan religion without really understanding any of it. The
Oh
the
yeah.
idea that the theosophists have of like Shambhala just because they vaguely knew of the concept. And like nowadays, you can just freely look up the texts that mention Shambhala. And it's not some like,
Hmm.
it's very far from their conception
Yeah.
of it,
Eh,
but it's still cool to be like, oh, I can trace exactly where they come from. To be able to trace through and be like, that casting of a circle and holding the space and the directional stuff, and you're like, that's all comes
yeah.
from, you know, Goetia mixed with like Tibet, and it's really cool.
Yeah, it
Share
is.
some DNA there.
Absolutely. There's a podcast I've listened to called Last Podcast on the Left. They cover a whole bunch of different things from cryptids to true crime, and they do stumble into like occults and metaphysical kind of figures. Of course, Aleister Crowley. They had a whole little series on him.
Well, it's
They had
hard
one
not
on.
to.
Oh yeah, they had one on Madame Blavatsky. That's actually where I first heard the name Rudolf Steiner, and then they also had Jack Parsons, who was a student of Crowley, but didn't have anywhere
Yeah.
near the narcissist. Like,
I'm not nearly as versed on Crowley as people that I know. I've heard some of the crazy stories, and that's about it. The famous one where he gets like kicked down the steps. But I know people that are far more qualified to talk about that stuff than me.
Um, I highly like if you ever get some time, like if you're just like sitting around doing something and you're able to listen to a podcast, I definitely recommend last podcast from their whole series on Crowley
We
because
should
it's
probably end our episode.
we probably should.
we should
I
probably
might
we should in editing probably cut it off right before we start talking
I
about
you know
right after
I might
Campbell.
I might leave this in, but
All right.
but
Well,
yeah.
I hope everyone's
Anyway, yeah,
enjoyed the diatribe.
yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
yeah. Let's go ahead and officially end this thing. And
Okay.
why don't
May.
you close? Yeah, close us out
Yeah.
with that awesome prayer you did last
Yeah. I know it'd be a different one this time.
time.
Um. As you set forth, may Mother Bear be at your back. May her warm breath warm you. May her paws clear your path. May the steady presence of her being reassure you. May all obstacles be cleared. May good fortune smile upon you. And the lessons that you need to learn, may they be taught. May you go forward hand in hand with our oldest mother, the mother of our mother's mother, the daughter of the land, guardian of the space. May you strive forth with the grandmother of the forest.